Good morning, everyone. Welcome to part 4 of the Legacy series. I've been excited about all of them, but I'm really excited about this one today. I'm Mandisa Thomas, founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, which is also known as BN. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us or who need a reminder, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization headquartered in the Atlanta area that connects with other Blacks and allies who are living free of religion and might be otherwise shunned by family and friends. Instead of accepting dogma, we determine truth and morality through reason and evidence. The mission of Black Nonbelievers is to provide secular fellowship, nurture and support nonbelievers in coming out, i.e. openly identifying, open identification, promote pride in the atheist and secular identities, and organize members for various events and charitable causes, including this one. And Black Nonbelievers welcomes all, regardless of age, gender identity, sexual identity, national origin, and racial identity. This Legacy series, which highlights the voices of religious dissent within the Black community, is presented by our Washington, D.C. affiliate and is also co-sponsored by the American Humanist Association. I'm going to share my screen for a moment because tomorrow, October 11th, is California Free Thought Day. It is an annual event that takes place that is organized by the North California organizations out there. David Diskin and others are responsible for this. I was a speaker at the 2015 event, and they have an awesome and important theme this year surrounding voting, which I know is very important to all of us. Black Nonbelievers is a sponsor, as you can see here. You can see other sponsors here, and I think Freedom from Religion Foundation is one of them. So please visit their website. The event is free to register online, and it will stream live on Facebook and YouTube. But please do register. You can go to their website. The information will be shared in the chat. That is tomorrow at noon Pacific time. So that would be 3 p.m. Eastern. For those of us on this coast. And as a reminder, please do follow and subscribe to BN on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Black Nonbelievers. We are on Instagram at B Nonbelievers Inc., Twitter at B Nonbelievers, and YouTube at Black Nonbelievers Inc. And as always, we encourage you to donate and support. Please do make your tax-deductible contribution to Black Nonbelievers. This can be done on our website. You can make your contribution recurring monthly. We are also available on Cash App at Black Nonbelievers. You can also request a foundational grant to us. You can also designate your purchases on Amazon through Amazon Smile to benefit Black Nonbelievers. You can also transfer stock to us through TD Ameritrade. And also, if your place of employment has a workplace charitable giving program, you can select us as a designee. And we like to thank each and every one of you who has donated through all of the current means, as well as all of your support. So we do appreciate that. And finally, I'd like to share our upcoming events. If you are a subscriber to Truth Seeker magazine, you can visit their website at truthseeker.net. You will see this amazing ad for the 10th anniversary celebration, which is coming up in January from the 15th through the 17th. We will be proceeding in person. The hotel where we will be hosted has upgraded their safety guidelines, so we are very, very happy about that. However, there is an online streaming option that we hope you will take advantage of if you are unable to make it in person. And so sponsorship opportunities are available, especially for those who, whether you attend or not. We certainly hope you support this event. We are celebrating our 10th year in existence, and we are going to have some amazing speakers, including Chris Cameron and Sabrina Dent, who were presenters as a part of the Legacy series. And if you can see, I'm wearing my Women of Color Beyond Beliefs shirt. We are hosting, we have rescheduled the conference till 2021. So we will be hosting that event next year. We hope you register for that. And finally, we have rescheduled our cruise convention, BNC Con, to 2021 as well. And so we have some, again, fantastic speakers for that as well. We have some very, very great activities in store that we always like to combine the education with the information and the activism. So you get a bit of all of that with Black nonbelievers. And so again, we hope you will join in and support our our programming and our events. And so I will like to turn it over to Roger, who is the lead organizer for our Washington, D.C. affiliate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mandisa, and thank you to everybody who's joining us this morning. Good morning to everybody. We're super excited to have another installment of the Legacy series. This is part 4, as Mandisa said. And today we're welcoming Mr. Andrew Seidel. Many of you already know him, and for those of you who don't, he is a constitutional and civil rights attorney, activist, atheist, author, former Grand Canyon tour guide, and sometimes photographer. At the Freedom Foundation is where he works, and he works there to ensure that the government obeys the First Amendment and that Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state remains tall and impregnable. When not litigating cases or standing up for freethinkers' rights, he writes at Free Thought Now and travels the country discussing atheism, church and state separation, constitutional law, and other issues affecting secular government. This is an important conversation. As many of you know, we started this series the day after RBG passed. And we obviously did not have that in mind, but it happened to be the case that this series was coinciding with this particular issue at this crossroads where we are today. And so it's super important for us to really dig into this issue that's called the founding myth. The founding myth is the book. You'll have to excuse some kind of sting is on the side, but this is the book that Mr. Seidel has written. It's a great book for those of us who know a little bit about constitutional history and so forth. It's nice to read this because you really get a chance to get into the space that the founders were in as they composed the document and the philosophies that were around this particular country. And so that's where we're going to be talking, what we're going to be talking about today. And I just want to read a little quote from the book, The Founding Myth, by Andrew Seidel. He says, the Bible's Matthew and Mark tell of a woman, a non-Israelite with a sick daughter. She asks Jesus to cure the child. Jesus ingresses her and his disciples urge him to send her away, but she persists. Finally, Jesus chides the woman, saying, it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. In other words, miracles are for my people, my neighbors, my children, not for dogs who worship other gods. Like the Orwellian slogan, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. U.S. laws incorporate prohibitions reflected in at least 3 of the 10 commandments. The ideal that America is attempting to live up to is a non-biblical principle inscribed on the Supreme Court, equal justice under law, whereas the immutable, imperfect law of Judeo-Christian God will forever discriminate against people who don't believe in the right God. American law comes ever closer to the equality ideal. God's law holds that some people are more equal than others. And so with that thought, I'd like to open up the floor to our guest for today, Mr. Andrew Seidel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. And I have to say that it is, in my opinion, the highest compliment an author can receive is seeing their book all tabbed up and
yes.
underlined and highlighted. Like that
I forgot.
that just warms my cold, godless heart. That was so wonderful to see. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome into my home. You're on the desk that I wrote this book on. It's really a pleasure to have you here. I wish we could be doing this in person. Ro and I have been trying to set something like this up. It seems like it's been years really that we've been trying to get something like this set up. I'm excited to have you. This is going to be a little more intimate setting, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm honored to speak at the Black Nonbelievers Legacy Series. I mean, alongside Dr. Cameron, Dr. Dent, Mr. Wright. And as Ro mentioned, I was asked to come speak about the founding myth, why Christian nationalism is un-American. And I'm going to do that broadly, and then I'm going to kind of narrow down on some issues that I raised that I think are more relevant to the Legacy Speaker Series. And then I'm going to leave time for questions because I know there is just so much happening right now, and to have a chance to ask like a constitutional lawyer questions may be something that people want to do. So there will be time for that. If you've got them, just hold on to them. The question I try to ask in the founding myth, one of the fights we are having right now is, do we have a government of the people, for the people, and by the people? Or is ours a government of the Christians, for the Christians, and by the Christians? That is our battle. Christian nationalism is an existential threat to our republic. That is why I wrote the founding myth, to destroy the identity that Christian nationalists rely on by exposing and destroying their common well of lies and myths. Christian nationalism is the idea that the United States was founded as a Christian nation, that we are based on Judeo-Christian principles, and that we've strayed from that foundation, right? We've got to get back to our godly roots. And they use that language of return to justify all manner of hateful and evil public policy. And Christian nationalism seized power in 2016. The best predictor of a Trump voter in 2016 was thinking that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. That was better than them being a white evangelical. It was better than any economic worries they might have. Christian nationalism incorporates a lot of those different threads: racism, economic anxiety, republicanism, evangelicalism, all of those into one sort of incestuous ideology. And the fact that that was the best indicator of a Trump voter should tell you that Christian nationalism is not a scholarly debate about the founding of our country. It is an attack on who we are. Christian nationalism is an attack on who we are. The goal is to redefine America according to the Christian nationalist identity, and then to reshape our law accordingly. They want to make it so that to be an American is to be a Christian, and to be a Christian is to be an American. And since a lot of you are in DC, I want you to think back to June 1st, 2020. I know it seems like it was a decade ago, but try to cast your minds back to when Trump had peaceful protesters gassed, beaten, brutalized with rubber bullets so that he could walk to a church and pose with a Bible upside down, as it turned out. People protesting racial inequality, systemic racism, racism in policing, police brutality, they were gassed and beaten in a scene that harkened back. Right? Trump trampled each of the 6 rights protected in our First Amendment in an effort to align our government with his Christian nationalism. It was a haunting, despicable scene that really encapsulates so much of what is wrong and un-American with this sinister exclusionary movement. Now, the point of that malignant, farcical stroll was to show that Trump and this nation are churched, that we are Bible-believing and Bible-beating, that we are a Christian nation, and anyone who disagrees with us should be beaten and gassed. The point is to elevate one group above others. Again, the goal is to rewrite and redefine our Constitution so that it creates 2 classes of people: conservative Christians, Christian nationalists, and everyone else. Right? It's not just Christians and everyone else. It's got to be the right kind of conservative Christian, and then everybody else. This is and has been the goal of Christian nationalism: to codify Christian privilege, to elevate Christians to this special favored class. Everybody else, second-class citizens. Many Americans already know something about what it's like to be a second-class citizen, but that is the goal here. And it's really important to understand this is not just about photo ops, right? Remember, Trump tapped into that undercurrent of fearful Christian nationalism and wrote it into the most powerful office in the world. Now, there's good news, real good news, not like the Christian version of good news, actual good news. And that's that their entire identity, the entire identity of the Christian nationalists, their claim to be the true heirs of the American experiment, it depends on certain myths and lies. And they are things that you have heard repeated many, many times, and you're going to hear them repeated more and more often as we near November 3rd, that we are one nation under God, and in God we trust, that the Declaration of Independence mentions the Christian God 4 different times, that the Founding Fathers were all evangelical Christians who prayed during the Constitutional Convention, that George Washington knelt in the snow at Valley Forge and prayed, that our laws are based on the 10 Commandments. All of those lies are debunked in the founding myth. And without the historical cover that these lies give, their policy justifications begin to crumble. Without their commonwealth of lies and myths, their identity begins to wither and fade. And with it, their power, their claims of legitimacy, their unity. In other words, their entire political and ideological reality is incredibly weak and vulnerable because it is based on historical distortions and lies. The problem that we face is that we need more than facts to fight back. We need better arguments. And that is the true purpose of the founding myth, to give you those better arguments, to utterly destroy this un-American political ideology. I want to give you new and better arguments. So the book is not simply a refutation of the idea that America is a Christian nation. Instead, I went deeper. I asked a question that lies at the heart of their claims to legitimacy. I asked, did Judeo-Christian principles positively influence the founding of the United States? And the answer to that question is no, they did not. America was not founded on Judeo-Christian principles, and it's a good thing, because Judeo-Christian principles, and especially those that are central to the Christian nationalist identity, are thoroughly opposed to the principles on which the United States was built. The two systems differ and conflict to such a degree that, to put it bluntly, Christianity is un-American. So that is the argument that I make, that there are these two conflicting systems, that they have irreconcilable differences. That is the founding myth. The point is that America will never be a Christian nation, because the moment it becomes a Christian nation, it will cease to be America. That is the argument that we need to be screaming from every rooftop and in every forum. America cannot be a Christian nation. Christian nationalism is incompatible, irreconcilable, antithetical to America. So this is what makes the founding myth different, right? Previous books have offered this gentle correction to the Christian nationalists. Hey, here's what history actually tells us, and here's what the founding fathers actually meant, and here's what the founding fathers actually said. And then they kind of leave it at that. And that's important, that's good work, but correction is not enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't have President Trump, right? Pointing out errors is insufficient. So this book does that, but then it takes the next step. It goes on the offensive. This book is an assault on the Christian nationalist identity. Not only are Christian nationalists wrong, their beliefs and identity run counter to the ideals on which this nation was founded. They are un-American. Now, if you were paying close attention, you notice that the question I asked, the central question, was whether or not Judeo-Christian principles positively influenced the founding of the United States. Because the we, the people, that embodies our constitutional identity is not fully realized. And I don't argue otherwise in the book. And one of my favorite quotes of all time is from James Baldwin. In Notes of a Native Son, 1955, he wrote, "I love America more than any other country in this world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." I agree, and I criticize much, perhaps maybe not enough, even in the founding myth. But let's take, for example, Roe mentioned that I worked to fight to keep Jefferson's wall of separation tall and strong. Let's take Jefferson as an example. I mean, this guy was a moral coward. He enslaved his own children. Thomas Jefferson could write of freedom so eloquently and condemn slavery even in fervent terms. And there's in the founding myth, I show a rough draft version of the Declaration of Independence, where he condemns the Christian king of Great Britain for allowing the slave trade, something that even the infidel powers wouldn't do. And he did it in these really broad and sweeping terms that you see in the rest of the Declaration, right? And so he could write of freedom eloquently and condemn slavery in these fervent and revealing terms there and elsewhere, while at the same time owning slaves, fathering children with those slaves who then themselves became slaves. This is, I mean, it's a paradox of cowardice. One of the great intellects of the founding generation excelled at communicating these grand ideas in poetic terms that still enthrall us centuries later, but he failed utterly and in terrible ways to practice some of those ideas. But let's back up. Let's look at the national scale as opposed to the individual scale. There's even more to criticize, because many of America's founding principles are aspirational, or they were for a long time. Since the American founding, successive generations have failed to fully implement those values, leaving it to their children to conquer human tragedies like slavery and segregation and the subjugation of half the American population, women. We've made a lot of progress towards including all people in We the People. And we've made genuine strides towards genuine equality, but there's still so much work to be done. Those as yet unmet goals don't alter America's founding principles. Instead, I think they speak to our ability, and probably more importantly, our appetite to realize those founding principles. And those Judeo-Christian influences, slavery, segregation, misogyny, we could add our fetish for legislating sex onto that list, exist, right? Those are Judeo-Christian principles that influence the founding of the United States. But those are poisonous influences that we need to purge from the body politic. We are still fighting against those influences today. It's actually a crucial point. So historically, religion gets dragged into modernity by secular movements and ideals. When it comes to progress, religion does not lead, it follows. And Professor Mark Smith has done some excellent work in this area. He likens it to the tail wagging the dog. And this seems counterintuitive to people, but it's only counterintuitive because religion later comes along and claims credit for the progress. It rewrites history, which is exactly what Christian nationalism is trying to do right now with America. So think about the historical opposition to divorce, to women's rights, to abolition, to desegregation, to civil rights, to LGBTQ rights. The stronger religious, theological, and biblical arguments were on the wrong side of history. Sure, some religious groups were on the right side, but the better biblical and religious arguments were always on the wrong side. And less rigid, less orthodox religion, the religion that was on the right, correct side, was liberalized by secular ideals and values. So take for instance, secularism drove religion to abolition. It drove churches to examine their collective consciences. This is why Frederick Douglass wrote that revivals in religion and revivals in the slave trade go hand in hand. And look, this is something that even Martin Luther King Jr. recognized. His letter from the Birmingham jail, something I reread every year, was written to his fellow clergy. It wasn't written to the country at large. It was written to his fellow clergy, who were one of the biggest stumbling blocks in the way. MLK often spoke of religion and the church as being a tail light when it ought to be a headlight. Now, again, this only seems counterintuitive to us because so many people equate religion with morality, and they think that religion is responsible for progress that it did not accomplish. So to give you a more modern example, think of the opposition to equal marriage. Think about that. Who opposed equal marriage? It was almost exclusively Christian nationalists, exclusively religious. the hatred and the ideas underlying that opposition were almost all based in the Bible. But watch what's happening right now, and take 10 years from now, 40 years from now. LGBTQ progress will have been because of religion. They're already starting to claim this. If you start paying attention to it, you will see it. And this is really a critical point. Religion is about the status quo, not progress. Religion is about privilege. It's about a chosen people holding an ultimate truth, not about equality. I'm so glad Ro read that those couple of passages in the introduction. They really illustrate that. Often we think of Jesus as this bastion of equality, and he really wasn't. But this also tells us that the absurd claim that America was founded as a Christian nation isn't true. Because if this were about truth, if this were about historical truth, Christian nationalists would be willing to claim any Christian influence, positive or negative, on the American founding. They would happily admit that Christian biblical justifications for slavery and subjugation of women. Yeah, we did that. They don't do it because it's not about history. It's about the here and now. Christian nationalism is the narrative by which the shrinking conservative white Christian minority seeks to maintain power and political ascendancy over a majority that is increasingly interested in equality and racial justice and reproductive justice and environmental justice and economic justice and on and on. And as America nears the tipping point at which Christianity's power and privilege are reduced to equality, the Christian nation myths are going to be trumpeted with renewed vigor. The Christian nationalist is not going to go gently into the obsolescence for which they are bound. They have grown accustomed to religious privilege. They are used to imposing their beliefs on unsuspecting school children. They expect politicians to pay lip service to their deity. They demand acknowledgments of their God on government property. But that time is ending. The end of Christian privilege is near, but you have to fight. And as progress marches on, the lies exposed in this book are going to be professed more often, more loudly, and with more desperation. You must be prepared to refute them factually and vocally. So the founding myth gives you the facts, and more importantly, it gives you new and better arguments. You are responsible for the rest. Outspoken resistance is, as James Madison told us, the first duty of citizens. And as I've been talking about the founding myth more and more this year, where everything seems to be going wrong, I get that this is hard for a lot of people. In many ways, I think the fight for state-church separation is a privileged fight. Right? After all, what does it matter if the government has an official religion or is trying to impose their religion on me if people are sick and dying, if they're impoverished, if they're homeless, if they're out of work? What does it matter when the courts are on the brink of repealing reproductive rights? When our schools are failing and our healthcare is being ripped away? What does it matter when our brothers and sisters are being killed in the streets and children are being thrown in cages? Does state-church separation matter? I think it matters more. Those kids were thrown in cages because of the Bible. Attorney General Jeff Sessions cited Romans 13 to throw those kids in the cages. That was how they justified it to the world at large and to themselves. That was how they salved their conscience, by pointing to the Bible. They learned how to do that in the White House Bible study. Whatever issues you care about, limiting the power of religion in our government, ending the Christian nationalist influence on our government will help. It's not a panacea, but it clears the way for real solutions, right? Do you want better education? Do you want full funding for public schools instead of vouchers for private religious schools? Do you want accurate science about evolution and sex taught in our classrooms? Do you want full civil and political rights for LGBTQ, for women, for minorities? Do you want reproductive justice and choice to be fully realized? Do you want a greener world and a healthier environment? Do you want America to get serious about global climate change and shun its deniers? Do you want access to better and universal healthcare? Do you want scientific research to be guided by scientists? Hell, do you want to solve the problems in the Middle East? Do you want our responses to pandemics to be guided by science and not wishful thinking? If you end Christian nationalism, end religious encroachments into government power, you will see progress on every one of these issues. So while secularism may seem like a fight for the few, the lucky, the privileged, I think this is a fight for us all. This is not a Christian nation. Our Constitution does not belong to the Christian nationalists. It belongs to we, the people, all of the people. And it is about damn time that we take it back. Thank you. I will leave it there, and we can take questions as Rowan and Mandisa see fit.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That's wonderful. We're going to get into some real good questions and answers, as Andrew said. And before we start, I just want to make sure that everybody has access to the program. If you have seen the chat and you scroll all the way up to the top, there's a program with not only information about Andrew and his work, but also just the links to his related content, as well as the book. And I would like to, I talked to Andrew about this earlier, I would like to do a little giveaway and to do some kind of giveaway trivia for the book, of the book. So I don't want to presume to ask whatever the question is, but as we go along with some of the back and forth, you let me know how you want to do it and whatever the question is, okay? Yeah, religion is not about progress, but it's about the status quo, is what you said. And it's so obvious in so many parts of the book. You break down history, history that's, I think we kind of intuit, but the specifics of the history, the particular conversations of the fathers, the founding fathers, and in as much as they were flawed, and in as much as they had their own prejudices with regard to Black folks and to women, and to people who were not elite, there was at least, first and foremost, an acknowledgement that they were imperfect on some level, and that they were also creating space and creating room for growth, to build upon what they were accomplishing. And so you go in a lot of detail to show both sides of that. I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about myself, just quickly. The history that this country, our educational system, unless you are in a private educational system, or unless you go well and beyond constitutional law and and so forth, or you are a historian, there's just so many gaps. And I'm not originally born in this country, although when I came here, I was in the D.C. area in Prince George's County. And I remember the time where I learned where the name Prince George's County came from, and just simple things like, oh, that there are people that go back, that these counties are not just named Prince George's County because it sounds good rolling off the tongue or whatever. And you talk a little bit about King George in the early part of your book. I think I wrote down on the 64th page or something. And you talk about the divine right of kingship that he assumed for himself with the Church of England, and just sort of the positions that he had, and how explicitly his influence was in the revolution, just as a king, and how the founding fathers were getting together and basically, countering that. Can you give us just a little bit more about some of those other, not just King George, but maybe some of the other people that you talk about? I think you talk about Thomas Hobbes, and some other people. Is there something maybe you might want to just share with us about some of the other lesser known folks who we don't know of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, I think, to understand King George's role when you're trying to understand what the Declaration of Independence did. And that was where I kind of talked about this. The divine right of kings was actually abolished in the Glorious Revolution, which I believe, don't quote me exact years, of 1660, give or take. So they weren't necessarily ruling by divine right. That had been rolled back. But King George did view himself as he was the defender of the faith. He was the head of the Anglican Church, and he viewed himself as God's representative on earth. Very Pope-like. Even if he wasn't necessarily ruling by divine right of kings, he still absolutely felt like akin to this biblical God in a way. And I think that's important to understand, given that he was the audience, at least in part, for the Declaration of Independence. Really, the Declaration of Independence was written for a candid world. And in the Declaration of Independence, they use a little bit of religious reasoning with King George on that point. And that attempt to reason with this theocratic monarch is taken by modern Christian nationalists to show that, hey, our country was founded as a Christian nation. So I actually have 2 chapters devoted to the Declaration of Independence in the book, where I look at every one of the references, look at how the document was created, why they actually wrote it this way, what were they trying to do with this language. And what you actually see, and this is one of those new arguments that I'm trying to get at, in the Declaration is an anti-biblical document. The Declaration of Independence fundamentally undercuts so many of the arguments in the Bible and the Bible itself. It lays the groundwork for saying we the people. It lays the groundwork for saying that all power comes from the people and flows upward to the rulers, not from a God and downward to the rulers and then downward to the people. That was one of the political philosophies it laid out. I mentioned Romans 13 earlier. This is what Jeff Sessions used to justify throwing children in cages. And that passage was cited heavily by Anglican ministers like Robert Boucher, who were loyalists in saying, you cannot secede, you cannot rebel against this king, because to do so is to rebel against God. Obedience to the government is every man's duty, is what they said. And they were citing to Romans 13. The Bible undercut the American cause for independence. The Declaration didn't require blind obedience. The Bible and the biblical God did. So and there's just this fundamental disconnect. And then to kind of answer your question more broadly, we know the argument I make in the founding myth is not where did the founders get these rights from, or get these ideas and these philosophies from. We know where they didn't get it from. There are many other great books written about how the founders relied on Enlightenment principles and where they did that. We have the records from the Constitutional Convention, and they don't cite the Bible. They don't refer to the Bible. It's almost as if the Bible didn't exist. And that's because there's no whiff of representative government anywhere in the Bible. It's not concerned with that. All it is theocratic monarchies. Thy kingdom come. It's all about that. The founders were rejecting what was in the Bible in favor of more enlightened principles.
All right. And going just a little bit before that too, there was a part where you talked a lot about the colonialists coming to or going to the Netherlands before coming to the United States, and that was something that I must have missed that too. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how being there influenced the sort of more, I guess, liberal views that they ended up drawing from later on?
That was one of my favorite chapters to write because the more I talked with people about this, this book is I'm a lawyer and I'm trying to give you better arguments. And this book is my experience having these arguments for a decade. And then I put it into print so that you can learn from that experience and go out there and win these arguments. One of the things that I always heard was, well, the first settlers came seeking religious freedom. And this is something I think if we could do a show of hands, most people in the audience would raise their hand saying, I learned that in my public school. And that's not right. It's close to right, but it's in like a very careful and important and nuanced way. It's wrong. So first of all, that is only referring to the Puritans and the Pilgrims and just them. And that was just one tiny little portion of the country that was settled. And they didn't come here seeking religious freedom. They fled England and they were fleeing religious persecution. That is true, but that's not the same thing. The first place they went was the Netherlands. They went to Leiden. And at the time, that was probably the most liberal, free country, at least in terms of freedom of thought, freedom of conscience in Europe, maybe the world. And they settled there for about a decade, a little under a decade, and they were losing followers because all of a sudden, the people who were part of this religion had the freedom to think for themselves and explore. And the sect couldn't use their civil powers to keep people in the religion. And the fathers of this groups were looking around and they're saying, look, if we stay here, nobody's going to stay in our, I mean, this was a very sad religion. I mean, very oppressive in many ways, right? The original war on Christmas was started by these guys. No celebrations for Christmas. So they got everybody together and said, look, we got to go somewhere. We can't stay here. We're not going to have any followers left. So they pack everybody up, get on boats. They go to the New World and they set up these monochromatic, oppressive, sad theocracies that fail miserably, really just absolutely fail. And they have the civil power and the religious power are one and the same. There's no difference. Persecution is rampant, really harsh system of laws and government. And that is not religious freedom. They came to establish their own little theocracies. They fled religious persecution, that's true, but they were not seeking religious freedom. And when the founding fathers, when the framers looked back on the history of the world and more closely at hand, the history of their continent, they pointed to that and said, we don't want that. That's a really bad idea. They did a really bad job. We don't want anything like that. If anything, that experience argues very eloquently against the idea that this was ever intended to be a Christian nation. So that's something I get into in the first part of the book. I deal with a couple other founding myths from the colonial time period that are really popular among Christian nationalists. But again, the whole point is to show that it's not just correcting the facts, right? But that what that story actually tells us is the exact opposite of what the Christian nationalists are arguing. It tells us that that is a terrible way to run a government and that the founders, the framers, didn't want that. It shows that we weren't founded as a Christian nation.
Sweet.
Thank you, Andrew. So there are a few questions that we have between the Q&A and the chat that we're going to try to get to as much as we possibly can. So the first was, where in New Orleans did you go to school? That should be a very short answer.
I went to Tulane University for undergrad. I graduated in 2004, and then I went back to Tulane Law School in 2006. I wanted to help out after Katrina, so that I was the first class back post Katrina.
Awesome. So there's another question asking, was Jefferson not essentially pro-slavery?
I mean, he was. I mean, he held slaves. So I don't think you can argue that he was not pro-slavery. He did write, though, often about the ills of slavery. And that's why I was trying to get at the fact that there's this massive contradiction, and he was this paradox of cowardice in a way, because he would write in these sweeping, broad, poetic terms about freedom and even condemn slavery. There's this famous quote. It actually appears in the Jefferson Memorial, and it's one of the favorites of Christian nationalists. I tremble for my country when I think that God is just. And Jefferson was talking about slavery, right? So he's recognizing that it's this unjust system, but couldn't take the financial hit, we would say, of doing the right thing. So I don't see how you could say that he was anti-slavery. He wrote about it, but we know, look, words are cheap. So yeah. I mean, but again, it's a paradoxical, and it's hard to know too with just the written word not having been there at the time, whether he was just saying what he thought was the right thing or what. But definitely, I mean, he owned slaves and enslaved his own children, so kind of hard to argue he's not pro-slavery.
Right. And so there is a question about the influence of deism on the founding fathers.
Oh, good question. One of my favorite things to talk about ever is what the founding fathers personally believed. Usually in normal times, I reserve this for the post book talk conversation at the bar. It's a good thing to go into the wee hours of the morning. But since we're stuck on Zoom and it's Saturday,
we do have a post discussion afterwards. So if you want to hang around for that, we will have some room.
I might do that.
Okay.
So the personal. Well, let me back up. It's a fascinating conversation, but we shouldn't be having it when we're talking about this question: whether or not the United States is founded as a Christian nation, whether or not we are based on Judeo-Christian principles. Love to talk about it. One of my favorite things to talk about, but it's kind of beside the point. And when we engage on this question, we are actually essentially losing the argument right off the bat. And I say that because even if the founding fathers were all Jesus rose from the dead Christians, that would not prove that we were founded as a Christian nation. And you can find arguments for all of the founders on both sides. You can find quotes for them on both sides, right? Like George Washington didn't believe the same things he did at 18 than when he was 38, than when he was 68, right? People's beliefs change over the course of a lifetime. We all know this from our own personal experience. So you can't necessarily pin them down on any one thing. But it's a distraction because, again, even if they were all Christian, it wouldn't prove that they founded this as a Christian nation. What you need to do when you start to get into these arguments is say, okay, I'll just assume for the sake of argument that all the founding fathers believed just like you did, person I'm arguing against. You still have to point to me. Show me a single Christian or biblical principle that the founding fathers pointed at and used to build our government, that they wrote into our Constitution, into our system of laws and justice. Find me that principle and show me how it positively influenced the founding. And that really can't be done. And that's what I try to get at in the rest of the book. So I actually address the religions and this argument in the first and second chapters of the founding myth. You cannot find a Judeo-Christian principle that positively influenced the founding of the United States of America. There are some principles that Judeo-Christianity claims that are universal human principles, and that's usually the biggest point. But this is something I get to in the rest of the book. So again, I think that it's a fascinating question. I think a lot of the founding fathers were not religious. They were probably deists. I mean, I mentioned George Washington earlier. So, I mean, this is a guy who never took public communion, joined a church when Virginia was still a colony because you had to do that if you wanted to advance politically in any way, shape, or form. So we can't necessarily attribute that to personal religious belief. When he was dying, he took a couple days to die, plenty of time to ask for some sort of religious consolation, or absolution or consolation at his deathbed. Didn't want that, didn't ask for it. There was no clergy there. Those are just not the actions of somebody who's a deeply religious person. And I think, you can go through all the founders and kind of do this. Don't think we necessarily would call any of them atheists, but certainly not true religious, not true believers in the true religion the way many people today claim to be, many politicians today claim to be.
You also talk about the oath of office and the so help me God, the so help me God, I guess suffix. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but the ending, and how that wasn't something that Washington wanted, and that there were opportunities that he had to put it in there, and he rejected it, or he didn't have it in there, but it was added later, and it just sort of evolved into a thing, but it wasn't in. He explicitly kept it out of the draft and the publishing.
Yeah. I mean, the oath of office for the President of the United States is written in the Constitution. And it ends, will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, period. The 4 words, so help me God, that have been added on are not written in the Constitution. And the idea that Washington, who was president of the Constitutional Convention when this was written, would just add words to an oath that they argued over and laid out and was written down, which would have been just a gross breach of etiquette. And his first official act would have been to amend the Constitution he had just sworn to uphold. It beggars belief. We know where the myth of Washington saying that came from. It came from Washington Irving, who was writing 50 years after the event. No way he could have heard it. And I go over all of this in the book. The modern history of adding "So help me God" to the presidential oath of office really goes back just to World War I. It does not date to the founding. There's no record of it at Washington or any president's inauguration. The first record is possibly Garfield in 1881 in a ceremony. Well, read the book for all the details on that. But yeah, really it dates to World War I. That's the modern trend.
Yeah, so to everyone who is, for all the attendees, we are answering the questions in order of time as well as relevant to the subject matter. So we do see, and also if you ask in the Q&A, you don't have to repeat them in the chat because we can see them. So going to the next question, the assessment of the end of the Christian privilege being near seems to counter the effects of a 6-3 conservative court and general rightward shift of federal courts. What gives you optimism?
Yeah, fantastic question. Super important question. The federal court system has been packed with Christian nationalist judges. We're talking probably by the time McConnell and Trump are done, depending on what they do in the lame duck sessions, we're talking maybe 250 total judges. Huge proportion, between a quarter and a third of all the various different levels of federal courts. Don't get me wrong. The Christian nationalists seized power in 2016, and they have been doing massive damage ever since. They are raging against the dying of their privilege. They are trying to codify that privilege into law, doing their damnedest to solidify it and solidify minority rule before they're out of power and never really get a chance to do it. And judges is one of the ways that they're doing that. And this is something that's absolutely crucial to me. You know, watching all, for instance, the debates, if you remember those, which seemed like decades ago too, the debates that we were having months ago, you know, all the wonderful progressive plans in the world don't mean anything if they cannot survive in a federal challenge with a hostile judiciary. And that is where we are right now. Everybody, I hope, calls their senators and tells them to oppose Amy Coney Barrett's nomination. I've been calling every single day. I hope you do too. I know people are disheartened about the chances, but remember back in July 2017, we stopped the Republicans from torpedoing Obamacare, and that was all with activism. You can do this. And who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, half the Amy Coney Barrett supporters have COVID right now, so you never know. You never know what could happen. All you can do is fight. So call your senators. Fight, fight, fight. But there are all that is to say. Also, there are solutions to all of this. There are solutions to the Supreme Court. There are solutions to the federal court. The federal courts are so overworked. I've been saying this for 3 or 4 years, even before we saw how badly they've been packed. You could double the size of the federal court system tomorrow, though I would not want to do it tomorrow. You could double the size of the court system in, say, 6 months, and they would still probably take a year or two to catch up on all of their work. So there are solutions to all of these problems. And again, I agree that the Christian nationalists are doing massive damage right now. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think they have done so much damage yet that we can't recover. I think everything they've done can be undone. Not easily. It's a long haul we got ahead of us, but we can win it. We can do it, but it's going to require fighting for quite a while.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Okay, so there's a question about what are some of the foundations of these myths of Christian nationalism in the USA? From an understanding, they started with the Second Great Awakening in the early 1800s, but the modern rise of it came with the election of Ronald Reagan. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There have been, throughout American history, various waves of Christian nationalism. And so the first time Christianity really entered American politics was actually in the run up to the Civil War. And I think to a larger extent than people have ever been willing to talk about or realize, the Civil War was really a religious war. And I get into this quite a bit in the book as well. And so that was the first sort of infiltration. I wouldn't say Christian nationalists seized power then, but they certainly did seize a little bit of power while the country was busy fighting the war. They added "In God We Trust" to our money at that point in time. And you saw a little bit of a wave there. You saw a wave, certainly in the 1950s. I do think Ronald Reagan marks a little bit of a turning point in that I think it was probably the first time politicians began deliberately wielding Christian nationalism as a weapon to win power, in probably a way that we had not seen in the past. Though I wouldn't necessarily, I could be convinced out of that stance. And I do mention that in the book. So, for instance, a lot of the religiosity that was injected into the GOP dates back to Reagan's tenure. And I do touch on a good amount of that in the book. And you can see throughout, if you read the whole founding myth, you can see each of those waves kind of written out in the various chapters. But that's how I prefer to think of it, rather than as one sort of continuous movement. It's sort of these different surges throughout our history.
Yeah, it's kind of like the country started and there were like these two race cars, I guess, and one was in front of the other and one was slightly behind, but they were always sort of right with each other as the country developed. Like the sort of religious tension between theocracy and Christian theocracy, maybe a little bit different in the way it looked at that time, but it seemed to always have been right on the heels of what the founding fathers were trying to do. And as you say, that wave is them kind of getting close, catching up a little bit, maybe sometimes surpassing them, but never being far out of sight.
Yeah, and our goal right now is to relegate them back to the fringe whence they came, right? That's where we want to shove them back to the far fringes of conservatism. And then we can move on and fix all the damage they've done. But yeah, I kind of like that, Ro.
Awesome. So I'm sorry, Ro. There's a question if you have any information about the Black church's involvement in state church separation.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot. We were talking before the call went live about how much I had to cut out of this book, which is still a reasonably long book. I cut something like 30,000 words out. And Mandisa, I think you and I have talked about this quite a few times. I read Du Bois' Souls of Black Folk a few years ago again after reading it in high school, and there's this quote in there that always jumps out at me: the Negro church antedates the Negro home. And I think about that all the time when you hear the conversations about the role of the Black church nowadays, whether it be in politics or in the civil rights movement. And it does seem to me a really important question that I do not believe I'm necessarily qualified to answer that well. So it's not something I focused on. I did have a reasonable amount in there and ended up carving it off, focusing more on the Civil War and slavery issues. I know there are some other great books on that. I know Dr. Cameron, who is doing 2 legacy talks, right?
Yeah, next week.
Yeah, and I know that's one of his. So you might want to save that question for him. I believe he's doing it next Saturday. That might be a good question for him to answer.
I want to make a quick comment slash question. Do you think that in all of these iterations and these waves of Christian nationalism, that there have been people who fought, obviously, up to present day, but do you think that just politeness and respectability as a ethos, an American ethos, and even, just to put it into our communities and to Black and African American communities, that is one of the things that keeps us from having critical conversations about the reality and the truth of these founding fathers. I think a lot of us, and I'm speaking for myself, and the conversations that are in my mind that I've had, but I think a lot of us we're able to be critical of, for example, the Pilgrims and as you mentioned, the folks who came from the Netherlands to settle to gentrify, to settle, right? To move out and to erase and to all of that. But those folks, we're able to see that in a little bit more critical light, and talk about that more accurately in terms of just the morality of that, and the history of that. But when it comes to saying something that would give any slight to religion, to the church, to the ideals of religious people, that seems to be something that we're not as eager to do. And as a consequence, it allows these arguments to sort of slip in the back door and just take a seat, and then we carry them into the next conversation of the next year and so forth. And then after a while, you get to this point where you have a fully formed belief that these ideas were always they were always Christian in origin, and they were always sort of virtuous in that way. Is the politeness one of the things that impedes the reality of this truth and this history?
I don't know that I agree with that. I don't know if politeness is the two, well, maybe to a certain extent, right? I mean, I know, for instance, I know the word un-American in the subtitle of the book. Christian Nationalism is un-American. I said it a couple times in the talk itself. I know that turns a lot of people off. It makes a lot of people squeamish because there's this inherent value judgment built into saying that something is un-American. But America is in a fight for its values. Christian nationalism is warping and torturing those values. It's trying to drag this country down a hole. So to hesitate to ascribe that identity with an apt phrase because it might be unpleasant or rude is to cede the American identity to an imposter. So one thing that I ask people is, if calling Christian nationalism un-American makes you uncomfortable, people need to remember that patriotism has no religion. Patriotism has no religion. And ask yourself this: am I uncomfortable with the un-American labels because Christian nationalism has already done such a good job? Because they've done such a good job of corrupting patriotism and conflating it with nationalism and MAGA hats and Trumpism. Have they done such a good job of corrupting what it should mean to be an American that I don't want to consider myself a part of it? Because I don't think the historically accurate claim that secularism is the true legacy of the American experiment is really the problem, right? I mean, America invented the separation of state and church. That's an American original. The idea was born in the Enlightenment, but it was first implemented in the American experiment. And that's something that I think all Americans could be proud of. So I don't think it's necessarily that. I tend to think that they've already done such a good job of corrupting it. That's part of the problem. And then, as I'm saying that too, I think one of the other things that contributes to our inability to fight this, first of all, I think we haven't been using good arguments. We've been relying on facts, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to do here. Un-American, that is a better argument. It's a gut punch. Okay. It goes at the very heart of who they are and what they are trying to do in a way that correcting a factual error doesn't. So that's one of the things that I really think is absolutely important. It's those better arguments. And the second thing I think is we need to set our expectations when we're having these conversations. You're not going to change you're very rarely going to change someone's mind in a single conversation. Right. It's going to be really unlikely that you're going to convince a Christian nationalist that they're wrong having a conversation with them. I've done it once or twice. More likely, it's going to be a series of long conversations, and they need to convince themselves. Mm-hmm. What you can do is plant the seeds and encourage a certain way of thinking, reading for themselves, researching for themselves, rather than just blindly accepting what idiots on Fox News say. and then being there for them when they have questions and trying to figure out how to help them answer that. And if you don't know, saying I don't know, and going and getting a copy of the Founding Myth and finding the answer in there. But, you know, I think that yeah, I mean, it was very subtle, right? I think people, you just have to recalibrate your idea of what a conversation about this should look like. You're not going to win. You're not going to convince them right off the bat. The best thing that you can hope for is to plant a little bit of doubt, get them to be a little bit more uncertain about their beliefs, and hope that they can then go and research and find the correct answers on their own. And to me, that sort of will go a long way. And I'm thinking back to that first question too, and I don't know if anybody heard Biden say this earlier this week, not to get political, just a very striking quote. He said something along the lines of, I think about what it takes for a Black person to love America. That's a deep love for this country that has, I think he said, for far too long never been recognized, been unrecognized, something like that. So as I'm talking about being proud of to be an American and patriotism, not having any religion, that one was kind of bouncing around in my head. But anyway, I've lost the thread of my thought now. So go ahead and ask another question.
Okay, so I'm going to combine, with that being said, I'm going to combine two questions that were asked. What principles would you use to forming special relationships with theists? And can you name one or two pragmatic actions that activists can take to counter the myth?
Yeah, great. So, I mean, I think the number one thing to do with theists, and it's a hard thing to do, is listen. I try to practice active listening. Listen to so that means listening to listening to the argument that they are saying and restating it and having them confirm it. That alone gets you much farther than sitting there thinking about the next counter argument that you're going to make when they're raising this. Oftentimes restating their argument in simpler terms, stripped of the theology and nonsense, has a much bigger impact than you coming out with a specific counter argument. But having facts and having the arguments at your disposal is, I think, necessary to do that as well. So the number one thing I would say when you're having conversations with theists is to try to actively listen. It's hard sometimes, and sometimes you just feel the need to just dunk over a person, and I get that, and especially if it's on Twitter or Facebook. But try to practice active listening, I think, is the best thing you can do if you're trying to convince somebody out of their theism. In terms of concrete actions that people can take, obviously you should buy a copy of the Founding Myth. But more seriously, you should be joining groups like FFRF, AHA, BN. You should be contributing as much as you can to the groups that are on the front lines, not just of fighting these issues in court, but of building the communities for people to leave religion and Christian nationalism behind. That's absolutely crucial. I also think it's absolutely critical to not let Christian nationalism go unchallenged. I mentioned that quote by James Madison that outspoken resistance is the first duty of citizens. And if you get into the book and read, you can see that throughout our history there have been instances of Christian nationalists imposing their religion on the rest of the country, and nobody speaking up at the time. Under God being added to the pledge, in God we trust being added to our money, in God we trust being adopted as the national motto. These were done at times where it would have been really difficult for people to speak out, and it wasn't done. And those violations of that constitutional principle have been used to justify bigger and worse and more alarming violations, all the way up to the spot where we are right now, where you've got people saying my religious liberty means that I can discriminate against you because you are LGBTQ. And that should be super alarming. And if you want to be really alarmed, go listen to the argument at the Supreme Court in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. Because the argument about being able to discriminate on the basis because somebody's LGBTQ does not end there. It does not. There's no way. If you listen to that oral argument, the justices keep asking, well, how is this different from discriminating along racial lines? And nobody had a good answer for that, because it's not different. There's no, if you have a license to discriminate because your God says so, you get to discriminate against whoever that God says. So there's no difference between LGBTQ discrimination and racial discrimination there. And if that license is granted by the Supreme Court, and it could be, especially if Amy Coney Barrett gets confirmed, it could be in the Fulton case, the Philadelphia case that's coming before the court. That could happen. I mean, so all that is to say, those minor violations provided the base that are leading us up to this point. And it's because people didn't speak out. So you've got to, as soon as you hear this, you've got to start shouting it down, whether it's online, whether it's in your local paper, whether it's just one passing line in an editorial. You've got to write a letter to the editor. You've got to reach out to that person and tell them why they're wrong. It is absolutely our duty to start trying to destroy the Christian nationalist identity. That, I mean, to me, that's the number one thing. Just don't let any of these remarks go unchallenged.
Okay, so with that being said, there's a question: would you agree that we must have a more universal and encompassing approach to Christian nationalism, including all of these as distinct but immutable parts of a greater whole?
I mean, I would love to see everyone opposed to Christian nationalism. I think a lot of people didn't realize how big a threat it was until Trump. And, you know, after the 2016 election, Morning Consult did a poll, and they found that 47% of the country thought that Christian nationalism was a threat to the country. And I reached out to the pollsters, the people who did it, and I said, you know, that's awesome. Thanks for publishing this. I wish I had had it a couple months ago so I could have put it in my book. What were the numbers before the election? And they said, we don't know. Nobody knew Christian nationalism was a thing. We didn't know we should be arguing against this. We didn't know we should be worried about it. Yep. So, I mean, I think we do need, I think all we have to do is wake people up to the danger. And what I was trying to do at the end of that talk by pointing out how important the fight for a secular government is to every other right is a way to do that. Because I think a lot of people don't realize how pernicious and omnipresent Christian nationalism is, and that fighting it and curtailing its influence and power gives us progress on virtually everything.
And if I could add that people don't necessarily identify themselves under that moniker. So being able to recognize it is important in terms of just what you're hearing and what you're reading and how you comprehend it. Because you can ask somebody, are you a Christian nationalist? And they say, no, of course I'm not. You know?
No, you're 100% right on that. And it's a great point. And very few people would, I think, willingly adopt the label. There are a few way out there who will, but you're absolutely right that very few people will do that. It's more of looking at what they believe and looking at what they're advocating, and then you know they are.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So one final question in the Q&A chat. How would you compare the rise, if any, of Christian nationalism after the 2000 election as opposed to the 2016 election?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think there are probably some similar overlaps. I'd want to see more data on that before weighing in. And if you're really interested on the data-driven side and a lot of the sort of demographics of Christian nationalism and the massive overlap between white nationalism and Christian nationalism, you know, it's the Venn diagram is a circle basically. You know, I would really recommend Andrew Whitehead and Sam Perry wrote a book called Taking America Back for God. They are sociologists, full of data and graphs, and they've got all the full breakdown of that. They don't go back to the 2000 election, but I would want to see something along those lines before I weighed in and said that it was the same or identical. It's okay to say I don't know, and I don't know.
I have one question of my own. Mandisa, do you want to do one more? Or was that the last one?
Nope, I think that was it. Yeah.
Okay.
Those were great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to just ask one question. Obviously, I want everybody to get this book. As you see, I have read it, but I'm going to probably reread it and be referencing it for quite some time. I wanted to ask you another book that is sort of in the same ballpark as yours, and I wanted to just ask your opinion on how you see what difference you see in terms of the approach of these two books. So right around I think what we're in October now, maybe sometime early August, Robert P. White, I think it's look back over here. Is it Robert Jones? Sorry, wrote the book quite too long and the end of White Christian America. And I just wanted to see what your opinion was. I'm just curious. I'm not trying to start any kind of thing. I'm just curious in terms of,
No, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I admire his work. And I have to say, I haven't had a chance to read the book fully because of COVID and the election and the Supreme Court and all that. I do have a copy. It's sitting in my stack. I'm currently reading Sasha Sagan's book for Small Creatures Such as We, and a couple other books related to researching my next book, but his is also in that stack. And I'm really looking forward to it. I've heard great things about it. I mean, expert demographer, really knows the data backward and forward. And I think it's different, right? I think it's different than my book for sure because of that. It's more of an explanation of what's happening and why. My book is meant to be an attack. My book is meant to defeat Christian nationalism, to give people the tools and the weapons they need to do that, not just to study it. I think if we're studying it is like examining the hole in the Titanic and talking about it. We need to be figuring out a way to patch that. And so that's what I'm trying to do. Studying is clearly important to figuring out how to patch it and fight it, but I'm more on the front lines and the street brawling side of things, I would say.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I haven't read those books either. I do have them, but just as I was reading, I was like, I wonder what he would say about.
And another great book is Catherine Stewart's new book came out maybe 4, 5, 6 months ago, The Power Worshippers. And she goes over, so if my book is the fighting book and you have Whitehead and Perry and then Jones sort of studying, she is, I guess I think the best way to describe her would be sort of an investigative journalist. And so she sort of opens the back of the watch and exposes all the gears and the inner workings of Christian nationalism and who's funding who and how they're all working together to get voters out. And it's a really fascinating and terrifying look at the machinery of Christian nationalism too.
Sweet. I'm going to ask a couple of trivia questions. I have about 3 queued up, and
Go for it.
And while people respond, you can respond to the panelists. How about that? So whatever your response is, respond to the panelists in your chat. That way, Mandisa and Andrew and I can see it. Andrew is the constitutional expert, so if it's wrong, he'll be the one to say it. But I did graft him from the book. So first question. This might be a softball. So the only qualifier is this is for people who don't yet have the book, and we're going to give away 2 books, okay? And so I'm going to ask these 3 questions, and hopefully that's all we'll need. First question is, who wrote the Federalist Papers? And you can send Andrew or all of us your answers. Too bad my keyboard isn't hooked up, Mandy. So I would do a little song.
I probably should have queued that up.
And well, do you want to do one by one, Andrew? Do you want to just go ahead and wait for the next one? Is that the best strategy?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, looks like, that's the first fully correct answer. We got 2 fully correct answers. Okay. So yeah, so it was Hamilton wrote most of them. Madison wrote a good chunk, and Jay wrote a few. So it looks like Walter H. said it first correctly, then Shanice, who said it first correctly with proper punctuation and capitalization. So I don't know how you guys want to handle that. I'll do that. So,
okay. Make sure you also send us your email so we can follow up with you, and you can do that privately through the channel, the chat. What do you call? Oh gosh, the panelists chat. And then we'll follow up with you. Okay, second question. Let's go. This one, I'm torn, but okay. Since we're doing legacy, and this is, so that was one. We'll kind of split this interracially, shall we say? So you got to identify this quote. Who's the person that wrote this quote? All right. His religion hindered him from breaking the Sabbath, but not from breaking my skin on any other day than Sunday. He had more respect for the day than for the man, for whom the day was mercifully given. For while he would cut and slash my body during the week, he would on Sunday teach me the value of my soul and the way of life and salvation by Jesus Christ. So if you can identify who said that, who is?
We got a few correct answers there.
Okay.
I think Ralph was. It looks like Ralph.
Ralph
was the
got
first
it.
One.
Okay.
They all have the same timestamp, but I'm assuming they come in order. So
What's the first one that you got? Because we're gonna go with the first one.
I see Ralph. Ralph looks like Ralph Dumaine.
Okay.
Sorry, Ralph, if I pronounced that wrong. Robert Holder and Cody also got it. But
okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put Ralph down, but I'm also gonna just if some things can change behind the scenes, then we can make some accommodations. So Robert, Ralph, and you said Cody. Sorry, Ralph, and then somewhere underneath that was Robert and Cody. You said.
Yeah. Then Robert Holder. Then Cody Crutchfield. Looks like I got it before. And then the first question was Walter H. and Shanice were the first two.
Okay.
Walter. I mean, Shanice had it perfectly. Punctuation, capitalization. Walter said Madison J. and didn't have a comma, and I don't know if he thinks there's a founder named Madison J. or not. So I don't know. I let you guys figure it out.
Guys, I'm hard. It's hard for me to make decisions, but okay, we'll figure it out. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Just a few closing comments before we sign off. The links, just once again, for Andrew and his background, his book, and so forth are in the program, which is all the way up at the top of the thread. So before we close out, you might want to just go up there and just click on that before it goes away. And that's an open Google document, which you can just sort of read through a little bit. It has the links for not just Andrew and his book, but also for a couple of I guess his book was recently burned. Somebody loved it so much that it was burned. Can you tell us a little bit about that real quick?
Yeah, there's a crazy Tennessee preacher named, what's his name? Greg Locke.
Yeah.
Pastor Greg Locke. Anti-masker, anti-science, anti-human, just all around way out there. And he... my organization, FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the organization I work for, ran our Ron Reagan ad during one of the Democratic debates. Yeah. And he saw it and started shooting off at the mouth. I got into it with him. I don't remember exactly how it developed. He said something I think he trotted out some Christian nationalist trope. And I said something along the lines of, "You're so wrong. I wrote an entire book about it. Maybe I'll send you a copy." Mm-hmm. And he said, anyway, that was how it ended up developing. So I wrote an inscription in there to him. I thought it was kind of a nice inscription. It was a little bit cheeky. Mm-hmm. And sent it to him. And then he filmed himself with a blowtorch burning it. Didn't read it. I mean, he read the inscription out loud in the video, but nothing else, and lit it on fire and threw it on the ground. So, it was nice to see.
Good times, right?
Yeah, good times.
I mean, it's only publicizing your book. I don't. It has the opposite effect, I imagine.
I did see a pretty sizable spike in sales afterwards. Yeah. It turns out that most people don't like it when you burn books, or people who read books don't like it when you burn them. So,
or CDs. Yeah. Thank you, Tipagore. It's the same kind of
so
thing.
It was a nice. It was a really nice little bump for me. So yeah.
And so that link is in there, as well as the link for next week. So next week we'll be concluding the series, and Professor Cameron will be back with us. And for those of you all who were here early on when we started, he started with the civil rights movement and the leaders from that point on up until right around the early 70s. Of free thought activism in black activism. And we'll be talking this coming week about what happened sort of right around the Civil War, pre-Civil War, up into, let's say, after the Harlem Renaissance, up until, let's say, Langston Hughes and Lorraine Hansberry and a few other people. So we'll be discussing the broader swath of the book, which is the first half of his book, in a lot more detail next week. Also, we'll have a little after chat today. We're going to close up in just a second, and we'll have an after chat. So if anybody wants to kind of just get some stuff off their chest or ask a few more questions, Andrew, you're welcome to stop by. If you got to go, we understand it as well. We really are glad that you could be with us this long. But
I mean, I truly appreciate the invitation. It was an honor for me. Great questions, and I'm glad we could do it. We'll have to do it in person when this is all over. But
absolutely.
Really
and how are you just sort of before I hand it over to Mandisa, how are you keeping yourself centered? We're all stressed a little bit because of the pandemic and because of this election and all of the daily onslaught of things. So what are you doing to keep yourself centered?
Yeah, I mean, it's a perpetual fight. I mean, the thing that I'm trying to do is channel my fear and anxiety and worry into some sort of activism. We're all representing 501c3s right now, so I won't say which campaign I'm volunteering for, but I'm spending a lot of time doing that right now. Pretty much all my free time is devoted to political campaigning, and I've never done that before. I've done poll watching, and I tried to be a sort of non-biased, but 2016 changed a lot of things. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, Wisconsin needs it, so thank you for
it. Does. Yeah, and other than that, I'm just staying inside, or not. I guess not inside. We go outside all the time, but I'm staying in my house for the most part and not going into public.
Wow. So, well, thank you once again, Andrew. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Mandisa, you want to say anything?
Yes, I'd like to say thank you to Andrew once again for joining us. It is always a pleasure to see you. It's a pleasure to hear you. And, I just really, really appreciate your support and your allyship, especially in your work with FFRF, because it's so important. And I just want to, just remind everyone that he touched on something very, very important. Things that you can do that are action based, which is, get involved, participate, volunteer, and also support the organizations that not just fight state church separation, but also engage in community building. So those are all important. They're all interlinked. If you can support more than one. And I would like to encourage people to support both BN and FFRF, as well as your other secular organizations locally and nationally as much as you can. So thank you very much for this.
And with that, we'll see everybody next week for our very last one. Thanks again. The links are in the chat for the after show. We'll see you in just a few moments, okay? Bye-bye.